put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frock, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For cock-a-crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock-a-crow, dagabag, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Cock-a-crow, dagabag, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. The naga jackass yard for fetchy load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. Sun a go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Hail Baka Kuma Kuma, even Lokonani. Aymara, Kwakwari, Hail Baka Kuma Kuma, even Banga Mary. Listen to this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. Them children glad when the weekend come. Out in the yard, them all gather round. Some a play catcher, some making house from straw. Two who come later, a grandma or grandpa. All a sit down just a wait. Moonlight so bright, it's just the right time to listen story or to say a little nursery rhyme. Grandpa voice a echo in the night as he tell you tales, some picnic are there with fright. Oh, Ligan, Mungeza, Massa Kurma, Bura, Nancy, even Watamuma. Oh, Ligan, Mungeza, Massa Kurma, Bura, Nancy, even Watamuma. Yeah, man, that's the true story that tell the people about life in the country.
Yes, family, good night. Welcome to the Figueira Show right here on 107.1 Bench Cup Radio. Knowledge is power, so please share the live. Share the live. You are on 107.1 FM Bench Cup Radio, and I'm your host tonight on the Figueira Show, Jermaine Figueira, and we are going to have a very educational and interactive conversation with you here tonight. And my guest is one of Guyana's most consummate professional, former Minister of Finance, Mr. Winston DaCosta Jordan, the only Minister of Government of Finance who would have been asked to be a guest lecturer at Harvard University twice. So we have a very competent former minister in the house who's going to be here to speak to us about matters of interest, matters of importance, and we believe the more you are informed, the better you will be able to make informed decisions. Region 10, my hometown. We have seen an influx of government ministers. It seems that Region 10 is a favored region. But favored for what? I mean, so many persons have been fired from this region. Nursing school shut down. The public school shut down where a lot of young people have been affected. But we have seen a lot of ministers in here, most recently, to make a lot of political speeches before they give the We Care cash grant to the parents, telling them what benefits could be derived from this $19,000 week care cash grant. But we are going to be engaging the minister so that he can share his perspective on if this cash grant was indeed a we care project and if it was beneficial. I don't believe it was. I don't believe it will achieve its true purpose. I'm, however, thankful that taxpayers are getting back some of their money. So go ahead and take your cash grant, spend it wisely, ensure that your kids, many of who hadn't had a proper meal because as public servants you haven't received an increase. So definitely take the money. It is your money, so take it. So let me take this opportunity to say to the residents of Region 10, the struggle continues for a better Guyana, for a Guyana in which all of us can be proud of and all of us benefit from the patrimony of our country. We are a nation that is blessed with a plethora of natural resources. Just the other day, as recent as 2 days ago, ExxonMobil announced another oil find. But to no surprise, no Guyanese has exhibited any euphoria, any form of excitement about this 22nd oil discovery because we are feeling the squeeze, so to speak, with respect to the increase in cost of living. Every single thing literally gone up. Every single thing gone up. So there's no joy in the announcement of what ExxonMobil has announced. Guyanese aren't feeling the benefits of that discovery. We aren't reaping the benefits of our natural resources. Only a handful of people are benefiting. And tonight we are going to engage in a very sensible conversation with the former Minister of Finance, where he's going to bring some of his expertise to the discussion so that more of our people can be informed so that they will be in a better position to make informed decision. Like I said, knowledge is power, people. Knowledge is power. So please share the live. You are on 107.1 FM, Bench Cop Radio, and you are with your host, Jermaine Figueira on the Figueira Show. So please share the live. The more people are informed, the better they will be able to make informed decisions. So we have people all over right now coming in. Wherever you are, just say where you're coming from. We see people from New York. We see people from um, Linden. Linden is in the house. Georgetown. Yes, I see some people from Barbies. Yes, please share the live. Knowledge is power. So let us get right into the conversation with the Honorable Winston DaCosta Jordan, former Minister of Finance. Mr. DaCosta, happy pre-emancipation.
Thank you.
Happy pre-emancipation.
Thank you, Jermaine. Thank you, Jermaine. Good night to your viewers. And let me just use this opportunity to welcome all those on the live and my people in Linden. They if they remembered this, their favorite minister, he's still around, and I still have my passport,
Yes.
my honorary citizenship to Linden. Just make a slight correction to the introduction that you made. I had the golden opportunity of going to Harvard University twice. Once in 1990 when I attended the Harvard Institute for International Development, and more recently, 5 years ago in 2016, when I was nominated among a very small select group of rising ministers of finance to attend Harvard for an intensive program. It's perhaps one of the greatest pieces of academic training that I have received in my lifetime. So, yes, twice I went, but not to give guest lectures. I don't claim to be, I don't claim to have been any guest lecturer at Harvard, but I did attend twice.
So I was misinformed, but partially, but you have attended twice.
Twice, yes.
So So you are going to give some form of lecturing tonight in the discourse as we try to empower our people. It is emancipation, and you are truly emancipated when you are mentally free. So not only physically free but mentally free, and I think knowledge can play a pivotal role in emancipating us mentally. So knowledge is power, and that is why we are encouraging all who are viewing to share the live, because the more you are informed, the better you will be able to make informed and prudent decisions. So right into the discussion, Mr. Jordan. Now, as early in January 2021, the government deliberately chose to raise the overall public debt ceiling, domestically and externally. Domestically, it would have raised by 233.3%. That was from $150 billion to $500 billion. And the external debt ceiling raised from $400 billion to $650 billion, an increase of 65%. Now, I believe it's important, um, former minister, for our viewership to understand what what it is when we say the the public debt ceiling domestically and externally, and if you would, I would greatly appreciate in a synopsis form, and more so in a layman's term, you give an explanation of what these two different debt ceiling really mean, and the implications it can have on future taxpayers, and more so Guyana as a country going forward.
Okay, right. So easily a ceiling is a limit. Okay, so the debt ceiling is the limit to which the government can contract new debts together with existing debt. Okay, so raising the debt ceiling suggests that the existing debt stock is at or near that ceiling, and the government intends to borrow in future, and therefore it needs that space within which to conduct the borrowing legally. So both the domestic ceiling and the external ceiling will constitute the public debt ceiling. That is the space within which the government can borrow. Now, the government moved to increase those ceilings in January. If you look back at what the government did when it came into office by whatever means in August of 2020, their forced budget, their forced budget contained a deficit that was unheard of in the history of Guyana. If you do remember, that deficit was roughly $90 billion, a deficit in a budget of $90 billion. And that deficit has to be financed. And it has to be financed from borrowing locally and borrowing abroad. Their ability to borrow abroad is severely restricted in terms of our gross domestic product. But they don't have the similar restriction on the domestic borrowing. So when you look at the configuration of the domestic to external borrowing in the 2020 budget, it's like about 4-to-1. 4 times the amount that you're borrowing externally, you will be borrowing locally. When you look at the 2021 budget, that's just before they read the 2021 budget, they brought in the debt ceiling in 2021. When you thought that they created a record in the 2020 budget, the 2021 budget exceeded that record. And so the deficit on the 2021 budget was 120 billion, right? So it moved from 90 billion in 2020 to 120 billion dollars. And again, as I said, that has to be financed from domestic and foreign sources. Again, the foreign sources are limited in terms of our gross domestic product. So the borrowing on the domestic front is not as limited as it is in the external fund, because they can raise domestic borrowing through treasury bills issued by the Bank of Guyana, and of course they can tacitly run the overdraft on the consolidated front at the Bank of Guyana, which is what they have been doing. You know, they chastise us for doing the same thing when we were in power. But in the 5 years that we were in power, the overdraft on the consolidated fund as at July 31st, 2020, in the words of the now Minister of Finance, was $78 billion. $78 billion. When last I checked that figure, at the end of April, it was in the region of $136 billion. So it had deteriorated from $78 billion in July 2020 to $135 billion by April 2021. And that is a space of about nine months, 9 months or thereabout. It had deteriorated by roughly $57 billion. And the reason why you're having that kind of deterioration, you have to look in terms of the budget that they brought out. Our budget tended to have a blend of taxes and borrowing. Taxes, because taxes is supposed to be the great equalizer. When you tax various forms of income and you broaden the tax base, you allow those who can afford to pay, and those who can't afford to pay, not to pay. At the same time, you use a tax instrument to promote investment in various sectors and so on. When they came in, they destroyed the tax base. So when you destroy the tax base while more or less maintaining the same expenditure, you have to borrow. You have to borrow. And that is what they did. That is why you had that ballooning in the deficit in the 2020 budget, because they removed most of the taxes in favor of the private sector.
Yes.
Okay. In the 2021 budget, not learning their lesson from the 2020, they removed even more taxes in favor of the private sector. Note carefully, workers did not benefit directly from any tax reduction or allowance increase. They did not. The last benefit that they had is what the coalition government had put in place in terms of tax reduction, income tax reduction, and increases in the income tax allowance. They have not had a single direct benefit under this government. So most of the tax removals, again, were in favor of the private sector in 2021, thus accounting for the massive increase in the deficit in the 2021 budget. So in 2 years, or less than 2 years, because you had spending that was about half year in 2020. But let's say 2 years, because it's a budget for a whole year. So in 2 years, 2020, 2021, the budgeted deficit would have been $210 billion. The budgeted deficit. $210 billion is roughly $1 billion US. And that is equivalent to roughly 3 times the amount that we presently have in the Natural Resource Fund, because there are about $341 million US in the Natural Resource Fund. And so 3 times that will give you just over $1 billion. So you've already...
So
the amount
the question
was fund 3 times over.
So Chief, we essentially have money sitting in the natural fund, and it is the fund was set up to do developmental works for the country. So the question is, why haven't we revert to using that money for national developmental projects rather than borrowing at the expense of the taxpayers having to work more hard to pay that back?
Well, you remember the harping and the carping of particularly the then opposition leader, by Jagdeo, that if they were to come to power, they will scrap the Natural Resource Fund and put in one that they like. Okay, you remember that harping and so on. They claim how It had too much power. The minister and nothing else. All they could say is that it had too much power for the minister, as if the minister was a static individual or was a non-changing individual in the context of time and government. All right. So they use that as that ruse to say that they will destroy the natural resource fund and bring in their own. 1 year afterwards, they cannot come up with a single amendment. They cannot come up with a single amendment to the natural resource fund. Not a single one. However, they have made their thinking and their intentions somewhat open, that they are going to go with a Kazakhstan model. And this Kazakhstan model gives power to the president, the vice president, and the minister of finance. So all our wealth in the natural resource fund account will be managed by this triumvirate of political persons. And they claim how our natural resource fund was too close to the executive. When our natural resource fund was one of the most transparent, accountable funds that they have around the world. To such an extent that our natural resource fund was able to get membership in the International Association of Sovereign Wealth Funds. That is the kind of recognition that has been given to the Natural Resource Fund of Guyana that was passed in 2019. Now, the reason why the government wants to continue borrowing is because it's to get around the stringency of the Natural Resource Fund. The Natural Resource Fund, you have to establish various committees, including a 22-member committee that has oversight of the fund. And that 22-member committee has to be drawn from a wide strata of the society, private sector people, youth, women, regional people, lawyers, accountants, all those kinds of different people have to be in that 22-member committee. And
what I find interesting though, Mr. Jordan, all these 22 representatives, even the private sector commission, civil society, all of these different agencies who were very vocal while we were in government are so silent with this proposal by the government to use the Kurdistan Natural Resource Fund model, which in itself is ripe for corruption. Why haven't they been so silent on a matter of great importance to the nation?
Well, several reasons. From day one, from the entry in you see, you have to appreciate, as you are as a politician, what is going on in Guyana. There are some people in this country who feel that Guyana belongs to them. Okay? And they feel, and they have their acolytes. They have their acolytes who perpetuate that. Their acolytes in the private sector, their acolytes in civil society, their acolytes in a number of the professional associations, in the media, and so forth. So when the coalition acceded to power in 2015, it was no joy for them. They didn't even give us a chance from day one. From day one, they were after the coalition government. We didn't even have a chance to settle down. We didn't even have a chance to settle down. And despite all the good that we did, those people had in their mind that we were interlopers. We had interrupted the people who they think are designated leaders and rulers of Guyana. And they tried in all their different ways, including attempting to sabotage the economy. All that took place while we were there. But nobody remembers that it's the coalition government in May of 2015 that had to find $12 billion to give to Gaisuko. We didn't create the mess of Gaisuko, but we had to find $12 billion again. Our manifesto that we had put out there was immediately disrupted. I mean, a lot of people don't seem to understand that. Was immediately disrupted. People say, well, you put out all these manifesto promises and you didn't carry through. Without understanding the tremendous problems that we didn't bargain for. Because after that billion, as you have seen, Jermaine, only this week, I believe, we had $11 billion in 2016. $11 billion in 2016 going to the sugar industry. Another $10 billion in 2017. Then we had to find, 2018, we had to find monies to pay severance. $5 billion in severance pay.
Yeah.
Going back even to 2015, while we had to find $12 billion for the sugar, we also had to find almost $6 billion for rice because the Venezuelans had abrogated the contract. People don't remember those things. In a very short time, 2015, when we should have been carrying through with our programs of salary increases and so forth for the public sector and so on, we had to find and siphon off $18 billion in the half year. And people remember, notwithstanding that, we were still able to pay the largest salary increase. We had moved minimum wage from the 30-something thousand dollars that it was to 50,000. That is 2015. And we were able to pay a bonus at the end of that year of $50,000.
I'm happy. I'm happy.
People don't remember these things. They don't remember things.
I mean, we would have raised public servant salaries while we were in government over 77%. And two budgets, the PPP would have promised to increase public servant salaries, and they would have failed to, even though Jagdio would have called a press conference to say in which line item they have so much money to give public servants an increase. Now I'm hearing they're saying that they intend to give public servants an increase, but they will give them at their time, and their time is around Christmas time, where they usually give their annual 5% increase to public servant. But with the rising cost in cost of living and no increase for public servants, two budgets, every single thing has literally gone up. What are the implications for Guyana if there's a prolonged increase in cost of living? What are your views in that respect?
Yes. Okay. So let me just finish off the NRF and I'll answer that quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Just ask me that question. So what I had set out there, why they don't want to use the NRF, is the stringency involved in the withdrawals, plus the parliamentary oversight of the withdrawals. Parliament has to give approval for those and so forth. They instead will borrow because you don't have the parliamentary oversight when it comes to borrowing. All you have is a public debt ceiling. And as long as they don't exceed that ceiling, they are good to go. So all the Minister of Finance needs is the permission of the cabinet, and then he can go out and borrow. Okay? And all the legislative aspect of the borrowing, all that is needed is for him then to send the contract to the parliament, not for debate and so forth, just for noting and the records of parliament. So you see, the scrutiny, the borrowing scrutiny is not there. The government can borrow the country into bankruptcy, essentially, without legislative oversight of the borrowing. Because they can continue to come back to parliament to raise the limit even more. And it just needs a simple majority to raise that limit. And they could borrow their way into bankruptcy of the country. And parliament has no oversight over the borrowing. So I don't foresee anytime soon the activation of the Natural Resource Fund, because they are not going to subject themselves to the stringency and transparency, notwithstanding all the talk that took place in 2019, notwithstanding all the talk that took place in 2018 about having the fund far away from officials and ministers and all this kind of story. I knew all the time it was talk. But the part of the problem that we have in this country is the partial nature of the society. The partial nature of society. So you cannot get, you got few people who will give you an impartial comment or impartial analysis. It is all a partial analysis, and then you have some gullible people who run with that partial analysis. And so, no matter what you attempt to do, no matter how much involvement they are involved and so on, it is as if the press, which has a lot to play where this is concerned, will put out the side that they are backing. And that is what is generally happening. It is easy to activate the Natural Resource Fund. The law is in place. It is easy to activate it. And it's easy thereafterwards to, within the context of the Natural Resource Fund, to start drawing on the proceeds of the fund, especially in this time of COVID, when large chunks of the population have lost income, whether by termination or whatever, lost the jobs or reduced salaries from the jobs and so on, coupled with increased prices in every single item that you could think of. There's not a single item in this country that has not increased.
Yes.
So the Natural Resource Fund can be activated to provide temporary cash grants for some defined period, and I'll come back to that. But to improve households' income at this time when it's very challenging. Now to come to your question. You have laid out the basis of the question, and I could only indicate to you is that, look, if you have $100 in the bank and you have no other source of income, which means that you haven't had any increase or anything, and that $100 is what you're using to sustain. That $100 in January, let us assume, could have bought you 10 loaves of bread. At today's prices, that $100 now could only buy you 4 loaves of bread. But you still have the same number of mouths to feed. So right away, what you think will happen? And that's a simple example. You have issues to do with inadequate meals, issues to do with inadequate nutrition, issues to do with productivity, because inadequate meals, inadequate nutrition means you cannot produce at the optimum level. So you will have work issues at the workplace to do with production and productivity. So you're working, and your labor now, your labor, which is a commodity in the Marxist sense, your labor has now been devalued.
Yes.
Your labor has now been devalued because the wages that are being paid today are the same wages that were being paid in 2019. And let us say 2019 January, because when we paid salaries in 2019, it was backdated to January of 2019. So effectively, you're earning today, July 2021, the wages that you were earning in January 2019, when prices were at a reasonable level, when inflation was very, very low. Today, you're hearing inflation for the first 6 months of this year could be in the region of 7 to 8%. And that will be, if that is true, that will be the highest inflation we've had maybe in a decade or more. That's to show you
Yes.
how is that and inflation is an index. But individual items in that basket, particularly consumer low-wage items, would have gone up significantly. I was looking at a basket that contains things like balanje, rice, sugar, and so forth. And when you look at a tiny basket that contains just those simple items, you could see the massive increase in prices. Now, you could tell me, well, it's due to flooding, it is due to shipping, it is due to international this, and all these, it is due to supply shocks. All of that is known. All of that is agreed.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the question is, what that got to do with me and my living? You're
Yeah.
telling me, you're giving me all the reasons why the prices are where they are today. Gasoline gone up again to $17 a gallon, right?
But that was my next question. Given the
Right?
rise of fuel, which compounds the ever present position that cost of living is high, it further compounds the cost of living.
Yes. So let me just finish this one and go to that one too. So you have a situation now where your 2019 salary um, in today's prices could only buy roughly maybe 60% of it. What do you need? No, I'm not going to say you don't need a one-off COVID cash grant or you don't need a $19,000. I'm not going to say those things are irrelevant. But what I'm going to say is what you need are one, a interim salary increase, an interim salary increase pending the beginning and finalization of negotiations with the respective unions. And a good faith increase could be a minimum 5%. A minimum 5% at this time. Then, using resources in the Natural Resource Fund, I estimate roughly 100 million US, maybe 100 to 200 million US. You can use those resources to provide cash grants over a 3 to 6 month period, and these will be targeted cash grants. I'm not going to pay a cash grant to somebody who's getting $500,000 or $800,000 or $1 million. I'm not going to pay that kind of money to you. I'm talking here targeted cash grant, targeted to those what we call needy, the poor, right? The indigent, the pensioner, those who have lost their jobs, those who have had significant reduction in their incomes, and so forth. Targeted cash grants. And once we do that, the numbers that we are talking about are certainly not going to be the numbers as if you were to give everybody, regardless of your station in life, regardless of your economic circumstance, regardless of your financial circumstance, a cash grant, as they did with the COVID cash grant. That was ill-advised approach, and it was a lazy approach. What you need right now are targeted cash grants, monthly cash grants to those that are in need. So a combination of salary increases and targeted cash grant could tide people over the next maybe 3 to 6 months once it's given today. Then you have this situation in the education sector. Now you're hearing that schools are going to open in September. I don't know where that is going, and I don't see any effort being made that will suggest that schools will be open in September. But let us, for argument's sake, say that were to happen. The very education grant that you claim you just gave out because we care. I am going to bet you that come September, for those who are going to go back to school, they will not be in possession of new uniforms and school boots. Because given the situation that I've just indicated in households, the last thing they are thinking about, is buying uniform and school boots for something that is likely or unlikely to happen in September. And all the indications suggest from the interviews that I've been doing that the people say we're glad for this cash grant and we could buy a black tank, or we could buy a little data, or we could buy food and so forth. They are thinking things now because things bad, very bad. I saw on a program last night, I think it was, where a man was stealing a Chinese fried rice somewhere in Paris. That's how things bad in Guyana. Bad, bad, bad. And I haven't seen it this bad since the 80-day strike that I grew up with in the 60s, the early 60s. I haven't seen things this bad for people to steal, a bag of fried rice, right? A portion of Chinese fried rice. It is
Carpet.
And there has been a rise in the sale of dog food. Now, I don't see too many dogs around. So what's the correlation there? There's been a rise in the sale of dog food. I see people all over the place selling dog food. They wouldn't do that unless they're making sales. So it appears as if people are buying dog food and eating it.
So, yeah. You hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Yes. Some persons hold the view with the COVID cash grant as well as this week here grant primarily is to cushion the economy and not essentially was more for directly for the people, so to speak, but it was basically to boost the economy of the country because they are aware that people don't have monies to spend. So one questions really if this week here, this recent cash grant of this week here initiative was done primarily to help the kids who are feeling the squeeze of one not having data, not having the devices, and more so not having access to learning online, but more
Jermaine,
so to
I
cushion the
could
economy.
I could tell you right away, Jermaine, it wasn't. Look, the people are interested,
Yeah.
as they said, in fulfilling, in ticking off boxes in the manifesto. Okay? So in the manifesto, they said they are going to bring back the We Care grant. Now, this is a manifesto that was probably prepared in 2019, okay, for a 2020 election. And in that manifesto, they said they're going to bring back the We Care grant, and they're going to up it from 10,000 to 15,000. So you bring that now today, when the situation is not normal. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So had the situation
Mhm.
been normal, they would have paid $15,000, coming close to August or so, plus the 4,000. That's what they would have done.
Mhm.
This is abnormal situation, and they're still paying the same amount and expect to get the same outcomes. That is where I'm suggesting to you that all they're interested in doing is ticking boxes. It's ticking boxes, because if they had really cared and understand the objective situation that we are dealing with, which is COVID, then they could have turned the same We Care grant, even if only for the circumstance of the COVID, to say, well, listen, we are going to give out $50,000 or $100,000. Forget the 4,000 for the time being. We're going to give the 4,000 when we know for sure that school going to come out. But the We Care grant is going to be $100,000. Okay? And it should be targeted to 1, 2, 3, 4. You can't have an education grant. You claiming it's an education grant, and then it's untargeted. That is why you see some people saying we can buy black tank, right? And we can buy data, and we can buy food and so on. It's like another COVID cash grant, because the cash grant, the COVID cash grant, was an untargeted grant. it just give you 25,000 because they say, well, listen, we know your incomes went down or challenge and so on. Take you 25,000, buy whatever you want with it. Now you come with the Figueira grant, which you say is an educational grant. But you haven't defined what educational outcomes you want this grant to achieve. You haven't determined what the $15,000 must be spent on, because we know the 4,000 is supposed to be school uniform, but you haven't said what the 15,000 must be spent on. So then you allow the recipients of the grant again to spend it like if it were another COVID cash grant. So the whole thing was ill-conceived. The idea might be good, but the whole implementation and the whole conceptualization and so on are totally ill-conceived. Education grants are very important, especially to poor people, especially to hinterland people, especially to rural people. These grants are extremely important. And these grants are to be given in a discriminatory manner, because it is difficult to give the same 15,000 to a hinterland student going to school in the hinterland and the same 15,000 to a student in Georgetown going to school in Georgetown. The needs are different, and therefore we must understand the difference between equality and equity. The needs are great. The prices are horrendous in those hinterland and rural areas versus what they are in Georgetown. And therefore, the person who's getting $15,000 in Rupununi is buying less than the person who's getting $15,000 in Georgetown. And so, again, as I said, the grant idea, the Figueira idea might be good, but at the end of the day, its implementation, its conceptualization, the fact that there's no outcomes that are predicted for it and so on, that is what is making that particular grant not the kind that we will wish to see frequented in Guyana's case. And of course, the point I raised, I think 2 weeks ago, it is unheard of for you to be walking around all around the place with this amount of cash, $3-point-something billion in cash eventually, to say that you share this money. When the same people in 2014, when they suddenly sprang this grant on the people of Guyana to buy votes in the 2015 election, these same people had used Western Union to distribute the grant. But today, in COVID, because in 2014 we didn't have COVID, and we didn't have to worry about covering your nose and social distancing and all these kinds of stories. And you pass the different Western Union, particularly the one in Water Street that was near to National Hardware. Every day you see long lines of people lining up there to collect the $10,000 that they were sharing out in 2014. Now you have COVID, where you have to wear masks, social distancing, and all these kinds of stories, and they're walking around with $3.4 billion in cash throughout the country to say that they're sharing out $15,000 and $4,000 for uniform. This is ridiculous. This is a recipe for mismanagement. It's a recipe for corruption and cronyism and everything else. And worst of all, the politicization of the grant is what I think is has made this whole situation unbecoming. The politicization of the grant. You imagine to collect $15,000. You know, I'll tell you something. And during the 8th-day strike, myself, my brother, we had to get up at 3 a.m. morning and walk to St. James Less School, because we used to live in another part of Kitty, and walk to St. James Less School and line up. Around 9 o'clock, they will open the gate. And 80, I think the number was 80. They'll take in 80 students, 80 kids, the first 80. And then after they lock the gates, everybody else outside can't get in for that day. And then you will have to wait, you'll have to sing, you'll have to do all kinds of different things. You have to read and all kinds of things. This time you're hungry. And around about 12 o'clock, you'll see the big pots coming in with the rice and the stew. And around about 12:30, 1 o'clock, you finish eating, you say your prayers, and then you leave to go home. Why am I saying this? This is the same song and dance they have these people doing. There's a whole agenda. Did you see it?
Yes.
There's an agenda to receive the $15,000. There's an agenda, pledge, prayers, speech by Minister, speech by Minister 2, speech by Redo, speech by REO, speech by this person, then share out of grant, vote of thanks, Garland, and afterwards push a mic in front of several people. Well, what you think about this grant, ma'am? Oh, are we glad for the grant? Are we glad for this grant? Right? We're gonna buy a black tank, right? And then we're gonna keep some for look, this is how you exploit.
In wrapping up,
The poor.
in wrapping up, we are about to program time, Mr. Jordan. But in wrapping up, I mean, the docile nature of the Guyanese society, the silence when they are supposed to be speaking up is not there. I mean, the programs like these provide an opportunity to bring information and knowledge to people so that they would be informed. But what would be your advice to Guyanese who have been listening to this program? I mean, we close to wrap up time. In 3 minutes, what would be your advice to the Guyanese populace, given the reality that they're experiencing and not speaking up? And they could be a theft of Guyana, the wealth of Guyana, by a handful of people. So, what would your advice be to them?
Well, the problem with giving advice to our people is that what you see is a situation where, for the most part, there are camps. They're essential camps. People are going through a rough time, regardless whether they're Indian, whether they're African, or particularly Amerindian. They're going through rough times. But
Yes.
the issue of holding one head, that issue becomes a hot potato of trying to get people across the divide to come together and unite for this common cause that is called improvement in our standard of living, improvement in our household income, improvement in the way how we are managing the COVID, and so forth. So it's a very difficult situation. But at the end of the day, all you could call for is unification of the races across the political divide for common things. I'm not talking about unseating the government or any such thing. I'm talking about uniting to force the government to do things in a systematic and structured manner.
For the benefit of all Guyanese.
That's right. To treat the issue from a Guyanese standpoint, not from an
Yes.
Eastern Guyanese standpoint or an African Guyanese standpoint or Amerindian Guyanese standpoint.
All Guyanese.
And all of the associations, whether private sector, whatnot, could see this matter in a unified light.
Thank you, Mr. Winston Jordan. Thank you very much for being on the program. It was very much educational. And definitely you will be invited once again to come on the Figueira Show right here on 107.1 FM on Benchcup Radio. Straight Up is next with Mark Benchcup and Dr. Hines. So please tune in. Happy pre-emancipation to all our viewers. Please go on Mark Benchcup Straight Up Show tonight and share the live. The more people are informed, the better we'll be able to make informed decisions. Knowledge is power. Let us emancipate our minds. Thank you very much, Dr. Mr. Former Minister of Finance, the one and only DeCosta, Winston DeCosta Jordan, a very erudite economist. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Jermaine.
You have
She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out